What drives a seemingly ordinary family to the edge of morality? What kind of betrayal turns respected parents into people capable of something unimaginable? In a quiet suburb just outside Charleston, South Carolina, a newlywed couple was building a picture-perfect life. Their wedding had been the talk of the neighborhood. White tents, polished beaches, champagne that flowed well into the night. But beneath that polished surface, a line had been crossed. 6 months after exchanging vows, the husband began a secret relationship with a teenage daughter of their next-door neighbors. When her parents found out, their reaction didn't follow the path of forgiveness or even legal justice. Instead, they made a decision that would leave seasoned investigators speechless and one man fighting for his life. Was this revenge, protection, or something far more complex? Cameron and Alyssa Halpern moved into Glenridge Lane on the third weekend of April. The boxes barely fit through the narrow hallways of their new craftsman-style home, but that didn't stop their neighbors from welcoming them with potlucks, hammer-down garden tools, and endless smiles. The couple had been married for 6 months. Cameron, 29, was a financial analyst with a tidy reputation, Excel spreadsheets by day, whiskey neat by night. Alyssa, 27, taught elementary school art and had a gift for remembering names, which made her the unofficial social thread of their block. They looked like every other middle-class newlyweds trying to make a good impression in a neighborhood of PTA moms and HOA regulations. Right next door lived the Feltons. Marcus Felton ran a home renovation business, while his wife, Deirdre, worked in medical billing. Their daughter, Layla, had just turned 18. She was quiet, kept mostly to herself, and had deferred college to figure things out, as her mother often explained. To most, Layla was invisible. To Cameron, she became something else entirely. It started with glances. From his study window, Cameron could see into the Feltons' backyard. Layla would sunbathe there on weekends, often wearing earbuds and reading something in a battered paperback. It felt innocent at first, then it didn't. The first conversation happened over the hedge. "Hey, you like Murakami?" Cameron asked, pointing to the book in her lap. Layla looked up. "My mom hates it. Says it's confusing." Cameron smiled. "Well, she's not wrong." It was small, quick, but it opened the door. A week later, Alyssa had a late conference, and Cameron brought Layla a coffee just because. 2 weeks after that, Layla was inside the Halperns' home, helping fix a Wi-Fi issue. She texted a friend, though no Reuters were touched. From Layla's perspective, things weren't what they seemed either. In a private diary she kept locked in her bedroom drawer, she wrote about Cameron with alarming clarity. "He sees me," she scribbled. "Not the daughter, not the child. Me. I know it's wrong, but I feel alive." Layla wasn't naive. She knew this wasn't a high school crush. But she was vulnerable, and Cameron, whether consciously or not, took advantage of that. The affair unfolded slowly, like water leaking into drywall, hidden, damaging, and hard to trace at first. Neighbors began to notice Layla leaving the Halperns' house at odd hours. Deirdre saw her daughter stepping out from her porch one evening around 11:30 p.m. He needed help with Excel, Layla had said. Deirdre didn't buy it. But it was Marcus Felton who grew suspicious first. He worked from home and had security cameras installed around their property, mostly to catch porch pirates. But one day, he spotted footage that changed everything. Layla sneaking out of their house around 2 a.m., barefoot, and heading next door. Marcus didn't say a word. Not yet. He copied the footage to a USB drive and kept it in his workshop drawer. One evening, Marcus brought it up during dinner. Casually, like a parent testing water before jumping in. "You been helping the Halperns a lot lately?" he asked, his voice flat. Layla paused mid-bite. "Yeah, just tutoring Alyssa on Photoshop stuff." That was the wrong answer. "I thought Alyssa didn't even like computers," Deirdre said. Layla changed the subject, but her parents were done asking questions. They started watching. The next weekend, Layla claimed she was sleeping over at a friend's house. Marcus waited until midnight, then walked out to the side of the house where he had a clear view of the Halpern spare bedroom window. The curtains weren't drawn. Inside, he saw shadows, movement, a figure that looked like Layla, another shaped like Cameron. He didn't blink. Back inside, Marcus poured himself a drink, something he rarely did. "I'm not going to the police," he said to Deirdre that night. Deirdre stared at him, eyes raw and silent. "Because the law won't do a damn thing," he added. "She's 18. They'll say it's consensual. We'll be the ones humiliated." Deirdre closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, something had changed. They didn't call the police. They made a plan. In a journal found later during the investigation, Deirdre's words were chilling in their clarity. "When you find your daughter in a man's house, married, respected, and older, you don't think clearly. You don't think about what the law says. You think about what it won't do. So you take matters into your own hands. That doesn't make it right, but it made sense to us then." The last night Cameron Halpern would sleep peacefully was a Sunday. He and Alyssa had friends over. Laughter filled the backyard. Layla wasn't invited, on purpose, but she watched from her upstairs window next door. At 1:17 a.m., Cameron got a text. "Come outside. Back alley. Urgent." He slipped out quietly, claiming he needed to take a call. What happened in the next 7 minutes would shock local authorities and lead to the most ethically complicated investigation of the year. What do you think so far? Do you believe this affair was truly consensual, or did Cameron manipulate Layla? Let me know in the comments. The back alley behind Glenridge Lane wasn't lit. There were no street lamps, no porch lights facing that side, just overgrown bushes, weathered fences, and the distant hum of a power transformer. It was the kind of place where secrets could take shape. Cameron Halpern stepped into the darkness at 1:21 a.m. His phone buzzed again. Further down, past a fence. He moved without hesitation. There was no fear, just a sense of entitlement, of control. He thought he was meeting Layla. But it wasn't Layla waiting in the shadows. It was Marcus. The punch came hard, fast, and unannounced. Cameron staggered, caught off guard. Before he could react, a second blow caught him in the ribs. "Stay down," Marcus growled. Cameron fell to one knee, wheezing. His hands went up, instinctively defensive. "Marcus, what the hell?" Marcus didn't answer. He pulled out a phone and played a video. Cameron, shirtless, inside the Felton house. The date stamp in the corner confirmed it. 3 weeks prior. "You think she's a toy?" Marcus said, voice control but sharp. "You thought nobody was watching." Cameron tried to stand. Marcus kicked him back down. "I'm calling the police," Cameron gasped. But Marcus had no intention of handing this to authorities. He turned the phone off. "You're not getting arrested," he said. "You're getting erased." Back inside the Felton home, Deirdre wasn't sleeping. She paced the whole way outside Layla's room, listening for sounds of movement. None came. Layla had taken a sleeping pill, unaware of what was unfolding yards away. Downstairs, Deirdre had laid out gloves, wipes, and a backpack. Inside were 2 boner phones, duct tape, and a pair of bolt cutters. She stared at it all like a woman who no longer recognized her own reflection. They hadn't planned to kill him. At least, not at first. Cameron's world turned red and black. The hits were precise, not wild. Years of construction work had made Marcus's hands deadly even without a weapon. But Marcus wasn't looking to end him. He was looking to ruin him first. "Layla's going to the police in the morning," Marcus lied. "She's giving them everything. Texts, photos, timestamps. It's done." That lie was crafted for maximum panic. And it worked. Cameron's face contorted. "She won't," he gasped. "She told me she loved me." Marcus laughed. "You ever think maybe she did, until she saw who you really were?" He held up a second phone, this one with a voice memo. Layla's voice, trembling, confessional. "I thought he cared about me, but it was a lie. I think he used me." The recording was fake, pieced together from old voicemails and AI-stitched audio. But Cameron believed it. The next thing he remembered was pain. Blinding, electric pain in his right shoulder. Something cold pressed against his neck. Duct tape. His mouth was covered before he could scream. Marcus pulled him into a utility shed near the edge of the property line. There was a folding chair, rope, a folded tarp. The whole thing had been prepared days earlier. "You'll stay here until we figure out what to do with you," Marcus whispered. The door slammed shut. Darkness swallowed everything. By morning, Alyssa had reported her husband missing. He said he was going outside to make a call. That was the last I saw him. Detectives arrived by noon. Officer Renee Marshall took the lead. She'd seen hundreds of domestic reports in her 15-year career. Most resolved quickly: a bar visit, a late-night walk, a forgotten errand. But this one felt different. Alyssa was calm. Too calm. While investigators canvassed the area, Marcus played the part of the helpful neighbor. "We've lived here for years," he said. "Good people. But things have been strange lately." "What do you mean?" Officer Marshall asked. "Arguments. Slamming doors. We try not to pry, but you hear things." It was a lie. He knew exactly what had been going on behind those doors. Meanwhile, Cameron sat tied to the chair, blood dried along his chin, hunger twisting his gut. His phone had been smashed. He had no concept of time. Every few hours, Deirdre brought water and half a granola bar. She said nothing. Her expression was blank, devoid of rage or mercy. On the third visit, Cameron pleaded, "I'll confess. Just take me to the cops." She shook her head. "You'll get lawyers. You'll get sympathy. You'll walk." "So what's the plan?" he croaked. She closed the door. Layla remained in the dark, but her instincts kicked in when she saw her father's truck parked near the alley camera. She checked the timestamps. The footage was gone. That afternoon, she called a friend, Maya, and told her everything. "He wasn't perfect," Layla said, "but he doesn't deserve to die." Maya took a screenshot of the call log and texted it to her older brother, who happened to be a junior officer with the local sheriff's office. That's when the case began to shift. Detective Marshall received a tip that afternoon, a possible lead related to a domestic surveillance system on Glenridge Lane. When she reviewed the files, she spotted an anomaly. At exactly 1:17 a.m., the Felton's back alley camera cut out. 4 minutes later, it resumed, but the feed had clearly been edited. Marcus had tried to wipe it clean. Marshall requested a digital forensic analysis. Within the hour, a team recovered deleted footage, Cameron walking toward the alley, followed by Marcus. By the time authorities returned to the Felton home with a warrant, Cameron had been moved. He wasn't in the shed anymore. He was gone, but not far. They found him inside a storage container at a rental lot Marcus had access to through a client, barely conscious, his wrists shredded from trying to loosen the ropes. Hypothermic, silent. When his lips moved, the first thing he said wasn't about pain. He said Layla's name. If you're gripped by how this story's unfolding, wait until you hear what happened in the interrogation room. Cameron Halpern's hospital bed smelled like antiseptic and regret. His face was swollen, jaw slightly fractured, and his hands trembled when the nurse handed him a pen to sign the discharge papers. But Detective Renee Marshall wasn't there for paperwork. She waited quietly in the observation room as 2 uniformed officers wheeled him into the station's medical suite. He wasn't cuffed. He was too weak to walk, much less flee. Marshall had watched men like him before. They often played the victim, hid behind expressions of confusion, framed their actions as mistakes. This one was different. He looked scared, for reasons even he hadn't sorted out yet. Cameron didn't speak during the first 20 minutes of the interview. He sat in the chair, arms crossed tightly over his chest, eyes darting from corner to corner, like he expected someone else to burst through the door. Marshall let the silence drag. When she finally spoke, her tone was calm. "You want to tell me what happened Sunday night?" He swallowed hard, lips cracked. "I was attacked." She nodded. "By whom?" His eyes flickered. "Marcus Felton." "Why?" He hesitated. The silence thickened. For personal reasons, he muttered. Marshall leaned forward. What kind of personal reasons? Another pause. Then, I was seeing his daughter. Marshall didn't flinch. Was she underage? No, Cameron said quickly. 18. Were you grooming her before that? The word hung heavy in the air. I didn't force her into anything, he said. That's not what I asked. He looked away. It just happened. Marshall jotted down a note. Let's talk about how it just happened. Start from the beginning. Back at the Felton residence, the tone was different. Deirdre sat in the corner of the interrogation room, arms folded tightly. Her expression was neutral, controlled, but on edge. Detective Leonard Carr took this round. Where did you keep him? I don't know, she replied. Carr slid a photo across the table. Cameron's bruised face. You think this just happened? You think we don't have security footage? Cell tower data? A digital footprint? She blinked, unmoved. I wasn't involved. Carr leaned in. You brought him water, fed him, visited him twice a day. You left gloves with your prints in the shed. Deirdre remained still. I protected my daughter, she said. Marcus cracked first. He was found pacing the parking lot outside the precinct, trying to make a call from a burner phone. He'd returned to the storage container earlier that day, discovered it empty, and realized the plan had collapsed. He didn't wait to be arrested. He turned himself in, almost like he wanted to explain. Inside the station, Marcus didn't ask for a lawyer. He asked for Layla. She needs to know why we did it, he said. We didn't mean to hurt him. Meanwhile, Layla sat in a side room with a social worker. Her face was pale, hands wrapped around a cup of untouched coffee. She hadn't spoken in hours. When Marshall entered, she didn't start with questions. She started with a statement. You're not in trouble, Layla. Layla nodded, but said nothing. We just want the truth. About him. About your parents. Her voice was soft. They were trying to protect me. From what? A pause. Layla blinked. From myself. In her written statement, Layla described the emotional conflict with clarity, how she mistook attention for affection, control for care, how she allowed a boundary to be crossed, even when part of her knew it was wrong. She confessed to sneaking into the Halperins' house, to texting Cameron late at night, to lying to her parents. But she also said this. He never treated me like an adult. He treated me like a secret. That sentence would echo through the courtroom months later. Back in the interview room, Marshall showed Cameron a printed copy of Layla's testimony. She says you manipulated her. Cameron's lips trembled. That's not true. She says you told her Alyssa was cold, distant, that your marriage wasn't real, that you'd leave your wife for her. I might have said that. Did you mean it? Silence. Marshall pushed the file toward him. She wasn't just your neighbor. She was a kid, and you knew better. He didn't respond. 2 hours later, Deirdre requested to speak to her daughter. Marshall allowed it under strict observation. When Layla entered the room, her mother stood but didn't speak immediately. I'm sorry, Deirdre said at last. Layla stared at her. You kidnapped him. I was afraid, Deirdre whispered. So was I, Layla replied. And you didn't ask me how I felt. You just assumed I was broken. The pain in her voice was sharper than anything Deirdre had prepared for. The district attorney filed charges within 48 hours. Marcus was charged with kidnapping, assault, and tampering with evidence. Deirdre faced charges for accessory to kidnapping and unlawful confinement. Layla, though not charged, was assigned a trauma specialist. As for Cameron, his legal situation was murkier. There were no child exploitation charges. Layla was legally of age. But under South Carolina's abuse of trust statutes, prosecutors explored pursuing a charge of indecent conduct under a position of authority, especially if it could be shown Cameron used his status as a neighbor and married adult to manipulate someone emotionally vulnerable. The DA also hinted at civil liability. Alyssa filed for divorce 3 days later. The community's response was fractured. Some neighbors defended the Feltons. Parents pushed too far, desperate for justice. Others condemned the violence. Media outlets turned it into a circus. Headlines ranged from suburban revenge plot unfolds in South Carolina to justice or vigilantism. The Glenridge Lane scandal. Everyone had a theory. Few had the facts. Back in holding, Marcus asked for a pen and paper. He wrote one line, addressed to Layla. You were never broken. I was just too angry to see it. What would you have done in Marcus and Deirdre's shoes? Was it protection or something more dangerous? Let me know below. 3 weeks after the arrest, the Feltons stood before the bail commissioner. The courtroom was crowded. Local reporters squeezed into the back row. Cameras forbidden, but presence undeniable. Marcus appeared first, his knuckles still scabbed, jaw clenched. His lawyer entered a plea of not guilty, but his eyes said something different, resignation. Deirdre entered second, dressed in navy slacks and a loose white blouse that looked deliberately neutral. She kept her gaze low, hands trembling only once. When Layla walked in from the public seating area, the judge set bond at $50,000 each, citing the premeditated nature of the confinement and the physical harm caused. They both posted within the hour. But once home, the Felton house was no longer a refuge. It was a battleground of doubt and public scrutiny. Alyssa Halpern, now living with her sister across town, gave her first public statement to a local outlet. There were things I saw in hindsight. Missed signals. Nights he stayed out late. I blame myself for not asking more questions. She paused before adding, but no one deserves what he went through, and no young girl should have been pulled into that mess. I don't want revenge. I want clarity. It was a measured response, but it drew lines. Sympathy for Layla, acknowledgement of harm, rejection of vigilante justice. It placed Alyssa in a complicated position, betrayed by her husband, but unwilling to support what the Feltons had done. Meanwhile, prosecutors were split. The assistant district attorney, Carla Weissman, pushed hard for full charges. These weren't people acting on impulse, she said during internal strategy meetings. They built a trap that speaks to intent. Her supervisor, however, leaned toward leniency. Public opinion sees them as protective parents, he cautioned. A jury might too. This internal tension mirrored what was playing out online. Threads erupted on Reddit and TikTok, some calling Marcus and Deirdre heroes, others branding them kidnappers no better than the man they targeted. In the chaos, one question echoed. When does justice cross a line? Layla, now enrolled in therapy, began to unpack the emotional consequences of the affair and the aftermath that followed. In one session, she described her relationship with Cameron not as romance, but as entanglement. It felt like I mattered to someone, like I wasn't just a quiet girl next door. But I see now, it wasn't real. I was just convenient. She didn't cry when saying it, but her therapist noted a shift in her demeanor, a coldness that hadn't been there before. The experience hadn't just hurt her. It had hardened her. Back at the police station, Detective Renee Marshall was called to testify during the preliminary hearings. She walked the court through the chain of events. The missing persons report, the tip from Layla's friend, the recovered surveillance footage, and ultimately, the discovery of Cameron inside the storage unit. Were there signs that Mr. Halpern had been physically harmed? The defense attorney asked. Yes, Marshall said. Visible contusions, swelling, abrasions. Was he in immediate danger of death? She paused. Not at the moment we found him. But had he been left there for another 24 hours, it's likely he would have developed severe complications. That detail mattered, because the difference between unlawful restraint and attempted manslaughter often comes down to proximity to lethal harm. Cameron, despite his injuries and pending lawsuits, wasn't done talking. He began contacting media outlets directly. One podcast featured his voice, digitally altered, but unmistakable. I was the one who got attacked. I was the one tied to a chair. Whatever people think I did, I didn't deserve that. The public backlash was immediate. He was accused of trying to salvage his image. Memes mocked him. Comment sections torched his attempts at victimhood. Sponsors from a fintech startup he co-founded publicly cut ties. Even those unsure about the Feltons' methods weren't ready to see Cameron as innocent. Still, the law doesn't run on opinion. During a closed-door meeting between prosecutors and Layla, she was asked whether she'd testify against her parents. She declined. They thought they were protecting me. I don't agree with what they did, but I won't be the reason they go to prison. Without her cooperation, the strongest charges lost foundation. The kidnapping case still held, but the emotional linchpin, Layla, stepped back. The state pivoted. A deal was offered. Marcus and Deirdre would plead guilty to false imprisonment and battery, serve 6 months in county jail, and attend mandated counseling. No felony conviction. No public trial. It wasn't a clean win, but it was closure. Marcus accepted immediately. Deirdre hesitated. She asked for one condition, a chance to speak with Cameron face-to-face, under supervision, in a controlled environment. To this day, no one knows what she said, but witnesses say Cameron left the room shaking. Later that week, he dropped his civil suit. The final court date drew fewer spectators. Marcus and Deirdre stood hand in hand, facing the judge. They didn't speak beyond what was required. No emotion, no drama. As they were escorted out, Layla remained seated. She didn't hug them. She didn't cry. But she didn't leave until the courtroom was empty. Flash forward, 6 months later. Marcus and Deirdre served their sentence without incident. They relocated afterward, changed jobs, sold the house, severed contact with most of Glenridge Lane. Layla enrolled at a nearby college, majoring in psychology. She now volunteers at a program that counsels young women navigating toxic relationships. No interviews, no memoirs, no podcasts, just quiet work, far from headlines. Cameron moved to Florida. He changed his last name and now works freelance. His record is clean, but his reputation is not. 6 months had passed, but the events on Glenridge Lane still echoed in Charleston's courtrooms, therapy offices, and neighborhood whispers. The legal proceedings were over, but the emotional debris remained scattered, unresolved, raw, and painful. Layla Felton kept her distant from her parents, though she never officially severed ties. She answered calls but rarely spoke for long. Letters from her mother went unopened in a showbox under her bed. She wasn't angry anymore, just numb. In her psychology course, Layla sat through a lecture on boundary violation and emotional coercion. The professor used a case study eerily similar to her own experience, an adult exploiting emotional vulnerability under the guise of affection. Her stomach tightened, but she didn't leave the classroom. She sat through it, eyes fixed on her notebook, pen unmoving. Later that evening, she wrote a short essay. Not for class. For herself. Consent without maturity isn't consent. Trust doesn't cancel out imbalance. I learned that lesson too late. She didn't show it to anyone, but the act of writing it helped. Elsewhere in Charleston, Marcus worked construction under a different company name. He didn't tell his co-workers anything. They only knew he kept to himself, worked hard, and never stayed longer than necessary. One night, while sanding drywall in a new condo, a co-worker mentioned seeing his face on the internet. Marcus didn't answer. He clocked out early and didn't return the next day. He'd grown used to disappearing. Deirdre struggled more. Job applications were ignored. Old friends avoided her. One even crossed the street at a farmer's market. She'd tried volunteering at a local shelter, thinking it might give her purpose. But a staff member recognized her and, within days, she was asked not to return. Not because she posed a threat, but because her presence made others uncomfortable. Reinvention, she realized, was harder when your past was searchable. Detective Renee Marshall, who had once driven the investigation, now taught at the police academy part-time. She used the Felton-Halpern case as a teaching tool, not for the crime, but for the gray areas it exposed. During one class, she posed a question to her cadets. What happens when the legal system lags behind morality? when the law protects those it shouldn't and punishes those who act outside of it. The room was silent. That's where chaos lives, she said, and where stories like this one are born. Meanwhile, a local podcaster named Felix Duran released a 3-part series on the case titled Lines Cross, The Glenridge Affair. It mixed interviews, leaked documents, and voice reenactments. Felix wasn't interested in clickbait. He was interested in understanding motivation. In one episode, he interviewed a former trauma counselor who had briefly spoken with Cameron during his hospital stay. He didn't see himself as a predator, the counselor explained. He saw himself as misunderstood. That's often the most dangerous type, because they justify everything under the belief that it was mutual. The episode ended with a quote from Layla's private essay, obtained with permission. When power looks like love, it's easy to forgive the wrong person. Cameron never responded to the podcast. He rarely interacted online, except for a small forum where he posted under an alias, mostly about stocks and real estate. But once, buried deep in a comment thread, he wrote something that raised eyebrows. Some mistakes stay in your bloodstream, no matter how far you run. The account disappeared a week later. Alyssa Halpern eventually moved out of state, accepting position at a nonprofit in Colorado. She declined interview requests and stopped replying to former neighbors. But she spoke once, anonymously, for a research article on betrayal trauma. People think it's about the act, the affair, the cheating. But that's not the damage. The damage is realizing the person sleeping beside you was living a second life, and you never saw it coming. That quote would later be featured in multiple psychology journals. Not because it was poetic, because it was true. Layla's therapist recommended closure letters, messages written but never sent. She resisted at first, but eventually wrote 2. One to her mother. I know you thought you were saving me, but what I needed was to be heard, not handled. And one to Cameron. You made me believe I was powerful, but all I ever had was proximity. She burned both pages in her dorm sink. The next day, she aced a mock trial presentation. Detective Marshall received an envelope one evening addressed to her personal mailbox. No return address. Inside was a Polaroid of Layla smiling with a group of college students at a fundraiser. No message. No signature. Just that image. Marshall pinned it to her bulletin board beside a note that read, "Justice isn't always delivered in court." A year after the incident, the Feltons tried to sell the house. Prospective buyers came, looked, and left without offers. The house sat on the market for 11 months before they pulled it entirely. It became a kind of symbol, untouchable, not because of price or condition, but because of memory. You can change the curtains, repaint the walls, even renovate the foundation, but some stories leave stains. In Charleston collective memory, the Halpern-Felton case became more than a scandal. It became a case study, referred to in legal seminars, social work discussions, and criminal ethics courses, not for its violence, but for its complexity. No clear villain, no clean heroes, just choices and consequences. 2 years later, a quiet reunion took place in a library just outside Charleston. Layla Felton was giving a presentation on emotional resilience and youth advocacy. Her voice carried calm authority, her posture upright. She spoke not as someone defined by what had happened to her, but as someone shaped by it and determined not to let it happen to others. Among the attendees was a woman who arrived late and sat in the back. Deirdre. She didn't approach her daughter afterward. She didn't expect forgiveness or an invitation to reconnect. She only needed to see Layla standing strong, to know she had found her voice again. It was enough. Marcus now worked in coastal Georgia, managing renovation projects for a real estate firm that didn't ask many questions. He stayed off social media. He kept no family photos at his desk. His evenings were spent on long drives and solitary fishing trips, the kind of activities that offered space to think without words. Every once in a while, he mailed a letter to Layla. He never received a reply, but he kept sending them. Cameron Halpern lived in Tampa under a new identity. He rented a modest apartment near the marina, worked part-time consulting, and kept his phone in airplane mode most days. He had no contact with Alyssa. She had moved on, remarried quietly, and deleted every trace of their wedding from the internet. One morning, Cameron opened a parcel that had no sender. Inside was a thin paperback. Red Flags, a study in emotional manipulation and trust exploitation. The dedication page read, "To anyone who mistook control for care, you're not alone." He closed the book and didn't open it again. Detective Renee Marshall retired after 20 years. Her final day on the force was spent training a new class of cadets. She used the Glenridge Lane case not as a cautionary tale, but as a framework. Justice isn't clean, she told them, and truth doesn't always lead to prosecution. But you owe people honesty. You owe them the effort to understand. After retiring, she began writing a book on ethics in community policing. The working title, Gray Isn't Neutral. Meanwhile, Layla's advocacy program had grown. She organized peer-led workshops at schools across the state, focusing on power dynamics, healthy boundaries, and emotional autonomy. She didn't use her story for marketing. She didn't mention names. But her passion was rooted in experience. During one Q&A session, a high school junior asked her if she had ever wanted revenge. Layla thought for a long time. Then she said, "Revenge is about giving your pain to someone else. Healing is taking it back." In the fall, Layla was invited to a statewide youth policy panel. She sat beside senators, educators, and nonprofit leaders. She spoke with confidence, offering policy suggestions around adult-youth boundary education and mandatory counseling in reported exploitation cases, even those deemed legal. Afterward, a woman in her 40s approached her privately. She didn't introduce herself. She just said, "My daughter went through something similar. We didn't know how to help her. I wish we had found you sooner." Layla thanked her and gave her a card with her organization's contact. That night, she cried for the first time in a year. The Glenridge house eventually sold. A young couple moved in with a toddler and a rescue dog. They painted the walls, redid the kitchen, and tore down the backyard shed. No one told them about the history. They didn't ask, and that was fine. Some chapters closed without a footnote. A final thread connected everyone involved in ways they rarely acknowledged but couldn't deny. A police archivist discovered an anonymous email stored in a digital folder connected to the case. It had no traceable origin, no linked IP, but it had been sent on the one-year anniversary of Cameron's recovery. The subject line read, "Moral injury leaves no clean hands." Inside was a single sentence. "Sometimes the people trying to save you do the most damage." There was no signature, but the file remained preserved, untouched. Deirdre moved north after her quiet appearance at the library. She worked nights at a community food pantry, rarely spoke of her past, and never asked about parole terms again. She wrote in journals. She walked every morning. She watched sunsets without commentary. She had once been a woman who took control. Now she was someone learning to let go. Marcus, too, found stillness in small things. A fishing pole tug, a hammer strike, a perfectly installed cabinet hinge. His greatest regret wasn't what he did. It was not asking Layla what she needed before doing it. No letter could fix that. But he wrote them anyway. Because silence, he believed, was worse. Cameron avoided eye contact when people brought up Charleston. In Tampa, no one knew the name Halpern. No one knew his story. He passed as someone ordinary. Until one night at a grocery store, when he saw a girl who looked like Layla. She wasn't. But for 5 seconds, he forgot how to breathe. On the 2-year anniversary of his arrest, Marcus received a package. Inside was a photograph. Layla, standing behind a podium at a university event. Confident, poised, smiling, not for the camera, but for herself. There was no note, no return address. But he knew who sent it. Every decision leaves a trail. Some are visible. Court dates, medical records, printed transcripts. Others live in the quiet moments, missed calls, unopened letters, dreams you try to forget. This story wasn't about a man's betrayal or a family's collapse. It was about the fallout of choices made too late and the cost of trying to fix pain with more pain. There were no perfect victims, no flawless protectors, only people, hurt, reactive, and reaching for control. And somewhere in that mess, a girl found her way back to herself. If this story moved you, share your thoughts below and don't forget to subscribe, like and share to enjoy more crime stories.